Welcome back. We've just figured out kind of the look that we're going to go for, which is going to be this lower left look, kind of a higher contrast, sort of bluish toned thing. And one thing before we completely commit to that is if you want to, in this split screen mode, you can switch through different shots and look at them with this grade on. Now, it's not going to be perfect because it is using the color grade from this interior shot, and it might not translate very well because it's actually adjusting our primary too. So it won't look exactly like this, but we can get a pretty good idea of what things look like with these various types of grade. And honestly, I like all of these a lot more than I thought I might. I thought I'd be totally sold on this one, but I kind of like the green one too. I think I really like the green one actually. But I'm a sucker for the kind of teal look too. So I think we are going to go with the teal look. That's exciting. Let's turn off our split screen. And now we're going to do something that's maybe a little bit backwards. What I like to do with an overall color look like this that's going to go over an entire project or even an entire scene is I like to apply this color grade to an adjustment layer in the edit page. So let's go over to the edit page and let's collapse our video tracks here a little bit. And then on video track 4, I'm going to say color grade, and we're going to add something called an adjustment clip. So let's go over to the effects library, and under effects, there's something called adjustment clip. Let's grab that and drag that into our timeline on video 4. And we're going to make this as long as the whole movie. I'm going to make this so it ends on the last frame of the movie. And anything under this adjustment clip is going to be adjusted. This is really cool because I can select this, and anytime I want to maybe zoom everything up, I can just zoom the adjustment clip and everything below it will be zoomed. Very handy. And the cool thing is that you can apply color correction in the color page to an adjustment clip and it will apply to the entire movie. Pretty slick, huh? So let's go to the color page. And here where it's turned into shot 2 adjustment clip. With this selected, we can actually scroll through our entire movie and we can refine our overall look, and it's going to be applied over everything. And then once it's applied over everything, we can go through the individual shots and fix any problems that it causes and kind of get more detailed with our colors. So let's go ahead and pick a good shot to kind of start this with. Again, probably a wide shot, maybe this one. We actually have our color grade left over here, so let's go to shot 33. That still has the style on it. All right, let's go back to shot 2. All right, in about 2 minutes and 14 seconds, let's go ahead and use this. And this is where we're going to develop our look. And the cool part about doing it this way is we can use multiple nodes and we can get crazy, and it's all going to just live in this adjustment clip, and it's not going to mess with the rest of our shots. So if we reset a color grade or something on any of these shots, it's not going to mess with the style because the style is being added afterwards on the adjustment clip. We can start by middle clicking on our middle still here, which is going to add our style, but it's also going to add our primary stuff, which is why this looks crazy. So let's take those out. I'll just select those nodes and hit delete. And now we have just the style being added over everything. And let's make some adjustments to this, make sure that we like it. I'll probably boost up the lift just a touch, gamma just a little bit. And a couple things that I want to do. When it comes to a stronger kind of stylistic look like this, something that will be distracting sometimes is if the whites or blacks aren't balanced. Even though you have this kind of tint that you're adding into an image, you still sort of want it to look somewhat believable. And there isn't really any time in real life where you'll look up at something like a cloudy sky is supposed to be white and it's, you know, tinted cyan. Sometimes there's like sunsets or whatever, but for the most part, white things look white and black things look black, no matter what the lighting is. So to kind of honor that, what we'll do is go down to the curves here. And remember, we have these curves behind our custom curves. And I'm gonna switch to luminance versus saturation. And what we can do here is desaturate the darkest parts of the image and the brightest parts of the image so that basically things just look a little bit more believable. And let's do this in a different node just so we have some control over it. I'll hit Alt S, and this is going to be called desat high-low so that we know what's going on. And down here in the curves, we're going to make a point right here and a point right here. And any place where it's really dark, we're just going to desaturate that all the way. And same thing for when it's bright, we're going to desaturate that quite a bit too. Now you can overdo this and make it look unnatural, but a subtle version of something like this is usually pretty good for one of these. So we can take this node off and on, and if we did it right, it should be pretty subtle with what we're doing. The darkest parts of the image should be desaturated, and the brighter parts should be desaturated. We should be able to see this on the scopes as well. If we click this off and on, we should see a little difference in the scopes around the top and the bottom. That's just a nice cheap trick to make the look a little bit more refined. You can especially see this here in her red sweatshirt. If we turn this off and on, you can see everything's kind of these red shadows. Then you turn it on and it's more of these gray shadows. And I like that look a lot, especially for something kind of harsh like this. We might take this down just a little. That just really kind of refines that look. Another thing we like to do with a look like this is kind of protect the skin tones a little bit, because her skin, if we turn this style off and on, it's really adding a lot of green into her skin, which makes sense with all the lighting, but maybe it's a little much. Maybe it's something where we want to add some of those skin tones back in. To do that, we're going to learn a couple different new tools. One is a layer node. So if we go over here to our nodes, right click and say add node, we can add a layer. What this does is add a node here that will pretty much duplicate whatever image you feed to it and lay it over anything else that you do, okay? And then you can kind of pick whichever parts that you want to use from this. Let's say, I'll just make another serial node here. Let's say that we had a node that was making everything really, 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 really blue. Like this. I'll just take the input from our desaturated node, put this here. We have two layers here. This bottom layer is actually the one that's on top, funny enough. And so we have everything really blue. And then when we put this layer node on it, it's just taking that same image and putting it over everything. So what we can do is pick whatever parts that we want to lay over our background here in this node. Let's just rename these real quick. I'll name this foreground and this background. And with the foreground, let's pick a part that we want to use. Probably the easiest way to show you this is with a window. Now, we haven't covered windows yet, but a window is basically the same thing as a mask, but it's just in the color page. So down here behind the curves, the fourth icon over on my screen, if you click on this little ellipse, that will bring up the Windows palette. And when you click on one of these shapes, what it will do is add a shape to whatever node you have selected. And then anything that you're doing in that node is just going to happen within that window, within that mask. So right now, we're adding the foreground, we're adding this image back in, but only under the mask. And this works for any node at all. Let's say I just have, this really pink color here on this serial node. If I add a window to it, it's only going to add that pink color correction under that mask. So that's a great way to actually just select different parts of the image that you want to adjust just by itself. And we're going to be doing a lot of this. This is a great way to do something like add a vignette. So I can reset my offset and make everything darker, right? And then make this circle really big. And I can hit this button right here to invert it. And now we have this vignette over our shot. There's the difference. So that's pretty much how a window works. It's pretty simple. If you play with it a little bit, you'll get it. I'll select all of these again in our adjustment clip and hit Control D to bring those back. And so now what we're doing is making everything blue and then adding this foreground back in right here. Again, what we're wanting to do is protect the skin tones, right? So what I'm actually going to do instead of adding a window is select a range of colors. And that's going to do the same thing. It's just selecting something by color rather than by its location on screen. So the way that we do that is with a qualifier. And that is the little eyedropper down in the color palettes. If you click on that, that'll switch your tool here in the viewer to an eyedropper. And anything that you click on, it's going to try and select a range of colors. So if I click on this red right here, what that's going to do is select a range of red colors here in these little controls. And because what we're doing right now is selecting which part of this foreground to actually show over the background, right now it's just making everything blue and then adding in this kind of weird red over it. And then to adjust my selection, I can play with these sliders down here. I can play with the center, and that controls which colors I select. The width is how big that range is. Same thing with the saturation, there's a certain range. Same thing with the luminance, all of that stuff. But what you're really wanting to do is get a nice selection here so that you can adjust one color specifically. And this kind of thing is used a lot for doing stuff like fixing problems. If something's too bright, you can select its range of colors here with the qualifier. And then because that's selected, anything that you do, just like when you select something with a window, anything that you do will only be applied to the parts of the image you've selected. So I'll just turn off our background here. We have these kind of red tones selected here in our foreground node. I can take the hue right here and just change the hue, change the color of her jacket if I want to, because we've already selected it here and we're applying any color correction from this node just to that spot that we've selected. And the same thing happens here in his coat because those colors fall along kind of that red selection as well. If you want to preview what you're selecting, you can click this little highlight button right here, and it will just show you what you have selected. And that's a really great way to actually see what you're doing here. And you can see really easily, like, man, it's actually kind of nasty right here. Maybe we can do something to fix that. Another thing that's important with that qualifier is this right here, the matte finesse controls. The big ones are denoise, clean black, and clean white. Denoise basically just kind of blurs this sort of so that the selection doesn't move around and look like it's kind of chattering all the time. And then if we hit play, it does chatter a little bit, but it might be less noticeable than if we didn't have that denoise on there. So if we take the denoise off, it's a little bit sharper, right? Clean black and clean white has to do with the matte. Now, we learned about mattes a little bit when we were talking about Fusion, and color uses mattes too. Anytime that you have a node, it also has an alpha, it has a matte. And with our highlight mode selected, if we click on highlight, we can click this right here, this highlight BW, and that will show us the matte. And so anything that's white, that's what we're affecting. Anything that's black, that's not what we're affecting. So we can use these kind of tools to make a good selection, right? And what we're really talking about here is the skin tones. We want our skin tones to be normal when everything else is kind of this bluish green. So what we need to do is access this image when her skin tones look normal, which would be before the style. So here in our nodes, let's disconnect this connection and let's take the original image that's being fed into the foreground right there. And we'll reset our node. Just right click on that node and say reset node grade. And now what we're really doing is putting our original image, whatever it is, over our stylistic image. So it basically looks like nothing's happening, right? I can turn on all these background nodes. It should look blue, but it's not because we have the foreground over it. If I turn off the foreground, everything looks blue. So if we want to just pick our skin with our foreground node selected here, we can drag over her skin and just select that. That'll select those kind of skin tones. Let's take our background and reset that. And now we're putting her normal kind of skin tones over this otherwise really kind of greenish tint. Now, the problem with doing it this way is that if you have other things that are the same color as her skin, you can't really isolate it, which is really frustrating. So you have to be a little bit more careful about how you select the skin. So let's go to our highlight here, and we're going to want to select things that are more saturated, that are just within the color of her skin, and make a really soft selection. And pretty much just mess with these until we get mostly just her skin and not a bunch of the floor. And using this matte finesse, we can clean the black. That just kind of fills up the holes, and clean the white. That fills up the holes. And now we have a little bit better mats here. We'll use a little bit of denoise. And now we're getting these really soft selections. So if we turn off our highlight, we can see we're adding her skin tones back in here. And if I hit Control D, that will disable and enable this node, which puts that kind of warm skin back over where it was. Now, this is something that could work. It's really easy to run into problems here because you can have those edges kind of chattering. You can have noise and everything from this. And so it's good to kind of look through our movie and see if there's anything obviously weird about having this kind of adjustment here. Again, we can turn off and on that node and see what's happening. Control D. This is adding a little bit more of that skin tone back in. Just keeping it a little more natural as far as those kind of warmer tones. This is again one of those things that makes a look a little bit more refined. Because we still get that warm contrast on this cool background instead of kind of desaturating everything that is warm. So it seems like that is a subtle enough adjustment where things are looking okay. Places where you'll have problems are things like this floor. Kind of adds a little bit of these kind of cloudy things back in here, which may or may not work. And so what I'll usually do is do a selection like this, and then I'll just turn it down. Just turn the opacity down a little bit. So we'll take this foreground and go down here to our key palette, and we can turn this key output gain down. Take this and just turn it down to like halfway. So again, we're splitting the difference, right? So now let's look at this on and off. Here's off, here's on. We're adding just a little bit more without going over the top. So let's take a look at our shot. And I like it so far. I think maybe we could even go a little stronger with maybe some blue and maybe kind of desaturating some stuff. Now, when you desaturate things, the cool thing is that you don't have to desaturate everything. You don't need to just take all of the saturation down. You can actually leave some of the saturation in using our curves. So if we go to our curves here, and actually what I'll do is after all of this, I'd say, let's just rearrange our nodes here. I like adding the skin tones back in. Let's go ahead and let's select our style node and go down here to our custom curves. And behind those curves, we want hue versus saturation, the third dot over. This is a graph of all the different colors in the image, and up and down is how saturated they are. So it's really cool because we could take something like this reddish pink of her jacket right here. I can actually even just color drop this like this. We can take that kind of reddish pink and we can leave that and desaturate other stuff. We could do things like desaturate some of the warmer kind of green tones, bring those all the way down if we want to. And because this curve is so smooth, we can actually go pretty crazy with this curve and it will still look nice. Like this is still a pretty, like we went just nuts, but it doesn't quite look natural, but it doesn't look offensive, you know? It's not like there's huge chattering edges on everything, right? So that's the really nice part about doing stuff with curves rather than a qualifier, is that you almost always get nicer results like that. So especially for a look that's over everything, it's nice to try and use these curves if you can. Now for adding in a skin tone again, and for adding our skin tones back over, you can't quite do that. One thing that you could do is select our skin tones and try and leave that there and just move everything else. But I think this will be just fine. So I think we'll desaturate things a little bit, maybe just a touch. Let's take a look at the difference there. This is off, this is on. So it takes a little bit of this kind of warm tones here away. That's the difference. It's all about everything kind of adding up to be that final look. In fact, we might take this desaturate high and low and maybe just put this at the end of our stuff because I want it to desaturate our foreground too. So I'll take this and just unhook it here. Connect our background again. And then we'll put our desaturate high and low right here as our last node. then anything that we do, the darkest parts will be desaturated and the highest parts will be desaturated. And I'd say I like this look quite a bit. I'd say we could even maybe go a little bit more blue with our style. So maybe I'll take the gamma, maybe I'll take the lift down a little bit and just push the darkest parts towards blue a little bit. And again, because we have this desaturate high and low node on, I can push this really far and we're still going to have black blacks and white whites. But we're not going to push it that far. I'm going to push it just a little, just so you kind of start to notice it. Maybe gone a little too far. I'd also say maybe this is desaturated just a little bit. So we'll push this up a little more. And again, let's grab our foreground and we'll take this key output maybe all the way down and just push it up a little bit just to add a little bit more of those skin tones back in. I'm at like 25%. Here's the difference in her face. Just adds a little more life there. And I like that look where we've kind of left this sort of reddish pink and kept everything else kind of blue. I think that's a nice look. So let's kind of scrub through the rest of our movie and see what that looks like. And what we're really looking for here is, does this look offensive on any shot? A lot of these don't look quite as good because they don't have those warm tones, like especially stuff that's outside that has a little more flat lighting. This kind of stuff, this looks like just a push. So that's stuff that we're going to have to mess with here in our secondaries. That means the adjustments that we make to each specific shot, to little specific parts. We could do things like boost our skin tones more, that kind of thing. But we're looking for overall, does this look how we want? Is the tone of the movie pretty good? I'd say that blue is just a little strong overall. And you don't really get a great look at it until you look at it through like the whole movie. See, shots like this, that looks pretty good, I'd say. This one looks nice. But I'd say it's just a little overdone on the cool. Again, always keep it tasteful. It's something where if you think it's maybe a little overdone, chances are probably is. And the great thing is that we can scrub through this whole movie and we can adjust it at any time because we're still on our adjustment clip. So let's take our style maybe. And I'll just take this whole style and grab the key output for that and just bring that down. Bring that down to like 50% or so. So now we can go through our whole movie and we're just dialing that whole thing back a little bit. So this is with no style, and this is the style back in. So it's pretty subtle now. And it still gives you that kind of cold feeling compared to our untouched, just primary grade. Still gives you a little bit of a cold feeling without just being tacky. The ones outside are a little bit too much of a push, I'd say, but we'll fix that. Stuff in the hotel looks all right. It's probably a little green just because of the lighting in the hotel and the colors of the walls and stuff, but the inside stuff looks pretty nice, I'd say. So again, here's before, here's after. And we're spending a lot of time because we want this to be pretty darn close before we start making really specific tweaks to each shot. I'd say that looks pretty nice. Very subtle, just taking that kind of warmish tone out of this. I think this shot looks great. I think that's like my favorite shot for the lighting and tones and everything. Some of this is a little bit dark, but that's just because of the primary grade, which we can go through and adjust. I'd say overall, this is a pretty good look, and we're going to move forward with that.